Sofia Chen would pull 12 Gs in an F-22 Raptor while unconscious pilots around her blacked out at 9. But when she first stepped off the transport bus at Falcon Ridge Air Base, Nevada, with her compact 5-foot 2-inch frame and a medical file thicker than most novels, everyone said she'd wash out before she ever touched the controls of America's most advanced fighter jet. They had no way of knowing that in just 8 weeks, this woman they'd written off as too small would execute a maneuver so extreme that it would save lives, rewrite Air Force training protocols, and prove that sometimes the greatest strength comes in the smallest packages. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The scorching Nevada sun beat down on Sofia Chen as she shouldered her regulation duffel bag and surveyed the sprawling complex of Falcon Ridge Air Base, Nevada. Hangars stretched across the tarmac like metal cathedrals, housing the most sophisticated aircraft on Earth. In the distance, the distinctive angular silhouette of an F-22 Raptor caught her eye, its stealth coating gleaming like liquid mercury. This was it, the advanced fighter training program where only the military's most elite pilots earned the right to fly the world's most lethal air superiority fighter. Around her, other pilot candidates moved with the confident swagger that came from years of dominating every flight program they encountered. Captain Jake "Thunder" Morrison, a 6'4" former college football player, hefted his gear like it weighed nothing. His flight suit was perfectly pressed, his boots mirror bright, and his jaw carried the kind of square confidence that belonged on recruiting posters. Next to him, Lieutenant Sarah Blade Patterson compared notes with Captain Rick "Falcon" Stevens about their previous assignments, elite squadrons, combat deployments, and flight records that read like aviation legend. Sofia observed them from a distance, noting how they naturally clustered together, sharing war stories and comparing credentials. She'd seen this dynamic before in every program she'd entered, the immediate sorting that happened when pilots sized each other up. Height, build, background, and that intangible quality called presence that seemed to matter as much as flight hours. "You sure you're in the right place?" The voice belonged to Marcus Viper Thompson, a lanky Texan whose call sign perfectly matched his sharp features and predatory grin. He'd appeared beside her with the silent confidence of someone used to being the best pilot in any room. His eyes swept over Sofia's diminutive frame with barely concealed amusement. "Your personnel office is back that way if you're looking for admin work." Sofia had heard variations of this question her entire military career. At the Air Force Academy, during flight school, in every squadron she'd served. Her response had evolved from defensive explanations to simple, direct statements. "Captain Sofia Chen, reporting for advanced fighter training," she said, adjusting her duffel bag strap. Marcus's grin widened. "No kidding. Well, this should be interesting." He gestured toward the group of pilots. "Hope you're not claustrophobic, Captain. F-22 cockpits aren't exactly designed for comfort." The comment drew chuckles from nearby pilots who'd overheard. Sofia had expected this. At 5'2" and 115 pounds, she was significantly smaller than the typical fighter pilot. The F-22's cockpit had been optimized for pilots between 5'4" and 6'5", and while she technically fell within the lower acceptable range, she was pushing the absolute minimum. "I'll manage," Sofia replied simply, but she could already see the doubts spreading across the faces watching her. In their minds, she was already a question mark, someone who might not physically fit the demands of flying the world's most advanced fighter jet. Colonel James Harrison appeared at the head of the group, his silver hair gleaming in the desert sun and his weathered face carrying the authority of someone who'd earned his rank in actual combat. "Listen up, people," he announced, his voice cutting through the desert air like a blade. "Welcome to Falcon Ridge. You're here because you represent the top 1% of military pilots. But being here doesn't guarantee anything. 40% of you will wash out before you ever solo in an F-22. His eyes swept across the assembled pilots, pausing briefly on Sofia before continuing. "This program will test every limit you think you have, then find limits you didn't know existed. Physical, mental, psychological, we're going to push you until something breaks. The question is whether that something will be your limitations or your spirit." The colonel's briefing was interrupted by the thunderous roar of an F-22 taking off from the main runway. All eyes turned skyward as the sleek fighter climbed at an impossible angle, its twin engines creating a sound that seemed to shake the earth itself. Sofia felt the familiar stirring in her chest, that mixture of awe and hunger that had driven her through every challenge of her military career. That's what you're here for, Colonel Harrison continued once the noise faded. But first, you need to prove you can handle what that machine will do to your body. Tomorrow, we start G-force tolerance testing. Maximum sustainable G-force for combat maneuvering is typically 9 Gs. Some of you might handle 10. The exceptional few might sustain 11. Sophia felt the familiar knot forming in her stomach. G-force tolerance was highly individual, influenced by factors including physical conditioning, body composition, cardiovascular health, and something called G-tolerance that couldn't be taught or trained. You either had it or you didn't. Her medical record showed concerning patterns from previous high G training. She'd experienced multiple G-lock incidents, G-force-induced loss of consciousness, during her initial fighter training, requiring additional monitoring and modified training protocols. Your room assignments are posted, the colonel concluded. Get settled, study your flight manuals, and get a good night's sleep. Tomorrow we separate the pilots from the dreamers. As the group dispersed, Sophia noticed she'd been assigned to Building C, room 247. The same building as Marcus Thompson and Jake Morrison. A coincidence that felt intentional. She suspected the instructors were already making mental notes about personality conflicts and group dynamics. Walking across the base, Sophia passed the medical facility where she'd spent considerable time during her previous training programs. Dr. Martinez, the flight surgeon, had been honest about her concerns. Sophia's smaller cardiovascular system and lower blood volume made her more susceptible to G-induced blackouts. While she'd eventually qualified for fighter aircraft, she'd required significantly more training time and had stricter limitations on certain high-G maneuvers. Her room was spartanly functional: metal bed, regulation desk, small closet, and a window that looked out toward the flight line. As she unpacked her gear, she pulled out a thick manila folder that she kept separate from her official records. Inside were years of personal research into G-force physiology, cardiovascular training techniques, and detailed analysis of her own performance under extreme conditions. While other pilots relied on natural ability and standard training, Sophia had turned G-force tolerance into a science. She spread her charts and graphs across the desk, data that showed her progressive improvement in G-force tolerance through specialized training techniques she'd developed herself. The official medical opinion was that she'd reached her physiological ceiling. Sophia's data suggested otherwise. A knock at her door interrupted her preparation. Marcus Thompson leaned against the doorframe, his casual posture somehow managing to look both relaxed and mildly threatening. "Settling in, Chen? Hope you're not planning to spend the whole program buried in paperwork." "Just reviewing some data," Sophia replied, not moving to hide her research. Marcus stepped into the room, his eyes scanning her meticulously organized charts. "Well, looks like homework for people who can't rely on natural talent." His grin carried just enough friendliness to make the insult almost playful. "Tell you what, tomorrow's going to be interesting. Most of us have been pulling 9G since flight school. What's your record?" Sophia met his gaze steadily. "We'll find out tomorrow." After Marcus left, Sophia returned to her preparation. She knew exactly what her official record showed: multiple G-lock incidents, extended training requirements, and medical concerns about her ability to handle sustained high-G operations. What the records didn't show was the 18 months she'd spent developing her own training protocols, working with civilian aerobatic pilots, and pushing her body through conditioning regimens that weren't part of any official curriculum. Tomorrow would be her first real test at Falcon Ridge, not just of her G-force tolerance, but whether years of dedicated preparation could overcome natural limitations. As she reviewed her data one final time, Sofia Chen prepared to prove that sometimes the smallest pilot in the program might just have the biggest heart and the strongest will to succeed against impossible odds. Outside her window, another F-22 roared into the night sky, its afterburners painting orange streaks across the desert darkness. Soon, she told herself. Very soon. The centrifuge facility at Falcon Ridge looked like something from a science fiction movie. The massive machine dominated the center of a reinforced concrete building, its long arm capable of spinning human subjects at speeds that would simulate the crushing G-forces of aerial combat. Sofia stood with the other pilot candidates in the observation area, watching as technicians prepared the device that would separate the survivors from the casualties. Dr. Sarah Kim, the chief flight surgeon, addressed the group with clinical precision. Today's testing will determine your baseline G tolerance and establish your limitations for F-22 operations. We'll start at 6 Gs and increase incrementally. The moment you experience tunnel vision, hearing loss, or any symptoms of G-lock, you signal immediately. Pride doesn't belong in this machine. Sofia studied the centrifuge with the same intensity she had applied to everything else in her military career. The gondola where pilots would be strapped resembled a fighter cockpit, complete with control stick, throttles, and display screens. During the test, pilots would be required to maintain situational awareness and perform basic tasks while their bodies endured forces that would make them weigh nearly 10 times their normal weight. "Chen, you're up first," Dr. Kim announced, consulting her clipboard. "Let's establish your baseline." As Sofia walked toward the centrifuge, she heard Marcus Thompson mutter to Jake Morrison, "This should be quick. $20 says she taps out before 8 Gs." The comment drew quiet chuckles from several other candidates who were watching with obvious curiosity. The technicians strapped Sofia into the gondola with methodical precision, checking harnesses, monitoring equipment, and communication systems. The anti-G suit inflated around her legs and abdomen, designed to prevent blood from pooling in her lower extremities during high-G maneuvers. Her heart rate monitor showed an elevated but controlled rhythm. She was nervous, but prepared. "Comfortable, Captain?" asked Senior Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the chief technician who'd been operating the centrifuge for over 15 years. His weathered face carried the kind of experience that came from watching hundreds of pilots discover their limitations. "Ready, Sergeant," Sofia replied, adjusting her grip on the control stick. In front of her, the display screen showed a simple flight simulation. She would need to maintain level flight and respond to basic commands while her body endured forces that would make her weigh nearly 10 times their normal weight. "Beginning rotation," Dr. Kim announced over the intercom. "Starting at 3 Gs, increasing by 1 G every 30 seconds. The world began to spin. At 3 Gs, Sofia felt heavy but in control. Her training kicked in, controlled breathing, muscle tension techniques, and the mental focus she'd developed through months of specialized preparation. The simulation required her to perform basic maneuvers while maintaining radio communication. 4 Gs, came the announcement. Sofia's body now weighed over 400 pounds, but she maintained her grip on the controls. Around the observation area, she could see the other candidates watching intently. Some looked confident. Others showed the nervous tension of pilots who knew they'd soon face the same test. 5 Gs. Sofia felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the increased effort required for each breath. The anti-G suit squeezed her legs like a blood pressure cuff, fighting to keep blood flowing to her brain. Her vision remained clear, her responses crisp. 6 Gs. This was where things typically became challenging for smaller pilots. Sofia weighed nearly 700 pounds now, and each movement required tremendous effort. The simulation demanded more complex responses: altitude changes, heading corrections, radio calls. Her voice remained steady as she responded to each instruction. "Outstanding performance at 6 Gs, Dr. Kim noted, increasing to 7. At 7 Gs, Sofia felt the edges of her vision beginning to gray. This was the warning zone, the precursor to tunnel vision and potential G-lock. But her specialized training had prepared her for exactly this moment. She initiated the muscle tensing sequence she'd perfected, tightening her core and leg muscles in precise patterns while maintaining controlled breathing. 7 Gs, sustained, she reported, her voice strained but clear. The simulation continued, requiring her to track targets and maintain formation flight while experiencing forces that would crush most people. 8 Gs, Dr. Kim announced, and Sofia felt her world compress. The weight was enormous now, nearly 900 pounds of crushing pressure. Her vision tunneled slightly, but remained functional. The anti-G suit worked overtime, inflating and deflating in rhythmic cycles. Most critically, her consciousness remained clear. "Still responsive at 8 Gs, she confirmed, though speaking required significant effort.
The other candidates had fallen silent in the observation area, recognizing that they were witnessing something unusual. Pilots of Sofia's size typically reach their limits around 7 to 7.5 Gs.
9 Gs, came the next announcement. Sofia now weighed over 1,000 pounds. The crushing force pressed her deep into the seat, making each breath a conscious effort. Her vision narrowed to a small circle directly in front of her. But within that circle, she remained focused and alert. The simulation demanded precise inputs, and she delivered them. Remarkable, Dr. Kim noted, her clinical tone unable to hide her surprise. Maintaining consciousness and performance at 9 Gs? From the observation area, Marcus Thompson's confident expression had been replaced by something resembling shock. Jake Morrison leaned forward, studying the monitors that showed Sofia's vital signs remaining within acceptable ranges, despite the crushing forces. 10 Gs, Dr. Kim announced after consulting with her technicians. This was beyond the normal range for F-22 operations. At 10 Gs, Sofia weighed 1,150 pounds. The crushing force was so intense that moving her arm to operate the controls required enormous effort. Her vision had tunneled to a small circle, and she could hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears despite the anti-G suit's mechanical sounds. But she remained conscious. More than conscious, she remained functional. "Controls responsive," Sofia managed to say, her voice tight with strain, but unmistakably clear. "Maintaining level flight." The silence in the observation area was profound. Pilots routinely trained at 9 Gs, but sustained performance at 10 Gs put Sofia into an extremely rare category of human physiology. 11 Gs, Dr. Kim announced after a long consultation with her monitoring team. The crushing force was now beyond anything encountered in normal F-22 operations. Sofia weighed nearly 1,300 pounds, and her body was experiencing stresses that would cause most people to lose consciousness within seconds. Her vision had tunneled to a tiny circle, her breathing required conscious effort, and every muscle in her body was engaged in fighting the tremendous forces. But through her specialized training, her enhanced cardiovascular conditioning, and something that couldn't be taught or replicated, Sofia remained alert and functional. Still, responsive, she managed to say, though each word required tremendous effort. Controls operational. Dr. Kim made the decision to end the test. "That's enough. Bringing you back down, Captain." As the centrifuge gradually slowed, Sofia felt the crushing weight lift from her body. Her vision expanded, her breathing eased, and the normal sounds of the facility returned. But the silence from the observation area remained profound. When the centrifuge stopped and the technicians helped her out of the gondola, Sofia's legs were unsteady but functional. Her performance had been unprecedented. Sustained consciousness and operational capability at 11 Gs was virtually unheard of for pilots of her size and build. Dr. Kim approached with her clipboard, her expression a mixture of professional fascination and genuine concern. "Captain Chen, that was an extraordinary performance. However, I need to understand how you achieved those results. Your previous medical records show multiple G-lock incidents during training." Sofia nodded, still catching her breath. "I've been working on specialized conditioning techniques, doctor. Cardiovascular training, breathing methods, and muscle tension protocols that aren't part of standard curriculum." "I see." Dr. Kim made notes on her clipboard. "We'll need to document these techniques and evaluate their safety before you're cleared for F-22 operations." As Sofia walked back toward the observation area, she could feel every eye following her. Marcus Thompson approached with an expression she'd never seen from him before. Genuine respect mixed with confusion. "That was," he started, then paused. "How did you do that? I've never seen anyone sustain 11 Gs like that, especially someone your size and build." "Training," Sofia replied simply. But as she left the centrifuge facility, she could hear the whispers beginning. The other candidates were trying to process what they'd witnessed, and not all of their reactions were positive. Some seemed impressed,
Others appeared threatened, and a few looked suspicious, as if her performance had somehow been artificial or enhanced. What Sofia didn't know was that her extraordinary G-tolerance would soon become both her greatest asset and her biggest liability. Because when you can do something that others can't, it doesn't always make you valuable. Sometimes it makes you dangerous.
The F-22 simulator facility was the crown jewel of Falcon Ridge Air Base, a series of motion platforms and wraparound screens so realistic that experienced pilots sometimes forgot they weren't actually flying. Sofia approached her assigned simulator with the confidence that came from her extraordinary G-force performance 3 days earlier. The whispers had continued, but she'd also noticed a subtle shift in how the instructors looked at her. Her centrifuge results had earned her a footnote in the official records and a reputation as the pilot who defied physiological expectations. Captain Sarah Mitchell, the lead flight instructor, stood beside Sofia's simulator with a tablet displaying the day's training scenario. Mitchell was a veteran F-22 pilot with over 2,000 flight hours and a reputation for pushing students to their absolute limits. Her expression was professionally neutral, but Sofia detected something else, a hint of skepticism that suggested Mitchell viewed Sofia's centrifuge performance as an anomaly rather than an indicator of capability. Today's scenario simulates air-to-air combat at high altitude, Mitchell explained as Sofia climbed into the simulator cockpit. You'll face multiple bogies at various altitudes and ranges. The mission requires aggressive maneuvering, rapid target acquisition, and sustained high-G combat turns. Think you can handle it? The question carried an undertone that Sofia had heard throughout her career, the assumption that her previous success was somehow artificial or unsustainable under real operational conditions. She strapped herself into the simulator's ejection seat, adjusted her helmet, and began the familiar pre-flight checks that had become second nature. "Ready when you are, Captain," Sofia replied, her hands moving across the F-22's complex control systems with practiced efficiency. The simulation began with Sofia's aircraft cruising at 35,000 feet over a digitally recreated mountain range that looked remarkably similar to the terrain surrounding Falcon Ridge. The F-22's advanced radar systems painted a clear picture of the airspace around her. Empty for now, but that would change quickly. "Raptor 01, this is Control. Multiple bogies approaching from the north, Angels 30, speed 500 knots. You are cleared to engage." Sofia's radar screen lit up with 4 hostile aircraft approaching in a loose formation. The engagement would require her to maneuver aggressively while maintaining situational awareness and managing the F-22's complex weapons systems. She pushed the throttles forward and began climbing to intercept. The first engagement went perfectly. Sofia pulled 8 Gs in a climbing turn that brought her aircraft into an advantageous position behind the lead bogie. Her missile lock was clean, her shot precise, and the digital enemy exploded in a shower of pixels. The simulator's motion platform tilted and rotated, providing physical feedback that matched the aggressive maneuvering. "Good kill, Raptor 01, Control confirmed. 3 bogies remaining." The second engagement required even more aggressive maneuvering. Sofia rolled inverted and pulled through a 9G descent that would have caused most pilots to black out or lose situational awareness. But her extraordinary G-tolerance allowed her to maintain perfect control while the simulator's motion platform subjected her to crushing forces. "Outstanding," Captain Mitchell noted from her observation position, maintaining perfect control at 9 Gs. But the scenario was designed to test more than just G-tolerance. As Sofia engaged the third bogie, the simulation introduced equipment malfunctions and system failures that required immediate attention. Her primary radar failed, forcing her to rely on backup systems while maintaining aggressive combat maneuvering. This was where the simulation became genuinely challenging. Managing system failures while pulling high Gs required a combination of physical tolerance, mental acuity, and systems knowledge that pushed even experienced pilots to their limits. Sofia found herself troubleshooting radar problems while inverted in a 7G turn, her extraordinary physical capabilities allowing her to remain conscious and functional while her brain processed multiple complex problems simultaneously. "Radar restored," she announced, just as her weapon systems displayed a lock on the third bogie. "Fox 3, she called, indicating a missile shot. The third digital enemy exploded, but the simulation wasn't finished.
The fourth bogey had maneuvered into an advantageous position and was now pursuing Sofia's aircraft. The engagement became a high-speed, high-G dogfight that required everything she'd learned about air combat tactics. Sofia pulled the F-22 through a series of maneuvers that would have been impossible in older aircraft. Vertical climbs at impossible angles, snap rolls that reversed her direction in seconds, and sustained high-G turns that kept her inside the enemy's turning circle. The simulator's motion platform worked overtime, tilting and rotating to match every aggressive input.
But as the engagement continued, something went wrong. Not with Sofia's flying. Her control inputs remained precise, and her situational awareness stayed sharp. The problem was with the simulation itself. The scenario had been designed assuming pilot limitations that didn't apply to Sofia. Her ability to sustain high G-forces while maintaining perfect cognitive function was breaking the simulation's parameters. The fourth bogey's artificial intelligence couldn't compensate for an opponent who could outturn, outclimb, and outmaneuver its programmed capabilities. Sofia's final engagement lasted less than 30 seconds, a brief, violent encounter that ended with another perfect missile shot. "Simulation complete," Control announced, all bogeys eliminated. Sofia powered down the simulator systems and removed her helmet, expecting to see impressed faces and congratulatory comments. Instead, she found Captain Mitchell studying her tablet with a frown that suggested concern rather than approval. "Problem, Captain?" Sofia asked as she climbed out of the simulator. Mitchell looked up from her data, her expression troubled. "Your performance was unprecedented. But that's actually the problem." She gestured toward her tablet, which displayed Sofia's flight data in detailed graphs and charts. "These G-loads you sustained, 9 Gs for extended periods, 10 plus Gs during combat maneuvering, it's beyond what we consider safe operational parameters." Sofia felt a familiar sinking sensation. "My performance was within F-22 capabilities, Captain." "Your performance exceeded human capabilities, at least what we understand to be normal human capabilities. The concern isn't your flying, it's what happens when you push yourself beyond these levels in actual combat." Dr. Kim appeared at Mitchell's side, carrying a thick medical file that Sofia recognized as her own records. "Captain Chen, we need to discuss your simulation results. Your G tolerance is so far outside normal parameters that we're concerned about the long-term medical implications." "I feel fine, doctor," replied, though she could see where this conversation was heading. "Today, yes, but sustained exposure to G-forces beyond 9 Gs can cause cumulative damage to your cardiovascular system, your vision, even your brain function. We simply don't have enough data on pilots who can sustain 10 plus Gs for extended periods." Captain Mitchell consulted her tablet again. "There's another issue. Your capabilities create tactical problems for formation flying and mission planning. If you can maneuver in ways that other pilots can't match, it makes you incompatible with standard F-22 operations." The words hit Sofia like a physical blow. Her greatest strength was being turned into a disqualification. "Captain, with respect, shouldn't superior capability be an asset?" "Not if it can't be replicated or standardized," Captain Mitchell replied. "F-22 operations depend on predictable performance parameters. When one pilot can exceed those parameters significantly, it creates more problems than it solves." Dr. Kim opened Sofia's medical file, revealing pages of data and analysis. "Captain Chen, we're recommending that you be transferred to flight systems analysis while we conduct a comprehensive study of your physiological capabilities. This isn't a punishment, it's a safety measure." Sofia stared at the two women who were effectively ending her F-22 dreams, using her extraordinary abilities as the justification. "How long would this study take?" 6 months, possibly longer. We need to understand the mechanisms behind your G tolerance and determine safe operational limits." Captain Mitchell's expression softened slightly. "Chen, your flying skills are exceptional,
But we can't risk putting you in an F-22 until we understand what your body is capable of and what the long-term risks might be. As Sofia walked away from the simulator facility, she passed Marcus Thompson and Jake Morrison, preparing for their own simulation runs. Their expressions were a mixture of confusion and something that might have been relief. The pilot who had threatened to outperform them all was being removed from competition, not because she wasn't good enough, but because she was too good. "Hey, Chen," Marcus called out as she passed. "Heard you broke the simulator. That's one way to stand out from the crowd." Sofia didn't respond. Her extraordinary G tolerance, the result of years of specialized training and natural physiology, had become a liability. She was too different, too capable, too far outside the normal parameters that military aviation was designed around. That evening, she found herself assigned to Building D, Room 15, the Flight Systems Analysis section. Instead of flying the world's most advanced fighter jet, she would be studying its systems and analyzing performance data. The irony was bitter. Her superhuman capabilities had made her too human to fly.
The Flight Systems Analysis Division occupied a nondescript building on the far side of Falcon Ridge Air Base, away from the glamorous hangars and flight lines where real pilots did real flying. Sofia reported to her new assignment at 0600 hours, carrying the same determination that had gotten her through every setback of her military career, though this one stung more than most. Through the windows, she could see F-22s conducting morning flights, sleek shadows against the Nevada sunrise that reminded her of everything she'd been denied. Master Chief Antonio Rodriguez looked up from a bank of computer monitors as Sofia entered the analysis center. Rodriguez was a weathered veteran in his late 50s, his gray hair and lined face telling the story of 3 decades in military aviation. His uniform bore the patches of multiple squadrons and the kind of ribbons that came from actual combat deployments, rather than training exercises. "You must be Captain Chen," Rodriguez said, setting down a steaming cup of coffee that smelled strong enough to wake the dead. "Heard you're the pilot who broke the G-force records and got yourself kicked out of flight training for being too good at it." Sofia managed a rueful smile. "That's one way to put it, Master Chief." Rodriguez chuckled, but his eyes showed genuine understanding rather than mockery. 28 years I've been in this business, Captain. Seen a lot of pilots come and go, and I can tell you something. The ones who end up in here usually know more about flying than the ones who get to keep doing it." The analysis center was a maze of workstations, each equipped with multiple monitors displaying real-time data from F-22 operations across the base. Sofia could see flight telemetry, engine performance data, weapons system status, and pilot biometrics information streaming in from active training missions. It was like having a window into every aspect of F-22 operations, from the mechanical to the human. "Your job," Rodriguez explained, leading her to a workstation in the corner, "is to analyze pilot performance data and identify patterns that might affect safety, training effectiveness, or operational readiness." Sounds boring, but you'd be surprised what you can learn when you're looking at the numbers instead of just living them. Sofia's workstation faced a wall-mounted display showing the current flight schedule. She could see that Marcus Thompson was airborne in Raptor 04, conducting advanced maneuvering training, with Captain Mitchell as his instructor. Jake Morrison was scheduled for weapons systems training in 2 hours. The other candidates she'd met were all progressing through the program she'd been removed from. "Master Chief," Sofia asked as she settled into her chair, "what exactly happened to the pilots who used to have my G tolerance? I can't be the first person to handle high G forces effectively." Rodriguez's expression grew more serious. "That's an interesting question, Captain, and one you might want to research while you're digging through the historical data." He pulled up several files on her computer. These are performance records going back 15 years, pilot biometrics, G-force exposure data, and long-term medical follow-ups. See what patterns you can find. As Sofia began exploring the database, she discovered that her workstation had access to an extraordinary amount of information, not just current pilot performance, but historical data from hundreds of F-22 pilots, detailed medical records, incident reports, and classified analyses of training effectiveness. It was a researcher's dream and a pilot's nightmare. All the data about flying, but with none of the actual flying. Her first discovery was disturbing. The database contained records of 12 pilots over the past decade who had demonstrated G tolerance similar to her own.
the ability to sustain 10 or more Gs while maintaining cognitive function. Of those 12, only 3 had completed F-22 training. 2 had been medically disqualified for exceptional physiological responses that exceeded safety parameters. 7 had been transferred to other programs or assignments. More troubling was what happened to the 3 who had completed training. Flight records show that all 3 had been involved in unusual incidents during their operational careers. One had attempted maneuvers that exceeded aircraft limitations, resulting in structural damage to his F-22. Another had been grounded after executing combat maneuvers that endangered his wingmen during a training exercise. The third had suffered a catastrophic G-lock incident during a high-G maneuver that he should have been able to handle based on his training records. Master Chief, Sofia called out after several hours of analysis, I'm finding some concerning patterns in the high-G tolerance pilots. Do you want to see this? Rodriguez approached her workstation, carrying his perpetual cup of coffee. What kind of patterns? Sofia pointed to her screen, where she'd compiled data on the 12 exceptional pilots. Pilots with extreme G tolerance seem to have higher incident rates than average. Either they push their aircraft beyond safe limits, or they experience unexpected physiological responses during critical situations.
Interesting. Rodriguez studied the data. What's your theory? I think the problem isn't the G tolerance itself, Sofia explained. It's that these pilots were never properly trained to manage capabilities that exceeded standard parameters. The training program assumes normal human limitations, so when someone exceeds those limitations, they're operating without proper guidance or safety protocols. Rodriguez nodded slowly. Go deeper, Captain. Pull the detailed incident reports and see what you can learn about the specific circumstances. And while you're at it, take a look at the current training protocols. See if you can identify gaps between what we're teaching and what high-performance pilots actually need to know. Over the following days, Sofia immersed herself in data analysis with the same intensity she'd once applied to flying. She discovered that the F-22 training program had been designed around average pilot capabilities, with safety margins built in for the typical range of human performance. But pilots who operated outside those parameters, whether due to exceptional G tolerance, unusual reaction times, or other physiological variations, were essentially flying without a safety net. The more she learned, the more concerned she became. The current training class, including Marcus Thompson and Jake Morrison, was being prepared for operational scenarios based on average capabilities. If any of them possessed exceptional abilities similar to her own, they would eventually face the same challenges that had sidelined the 12 pilots in her historical analysis. During her lunch break on Thursday, Sofia walked past the flight line and saw Marcus Thompson climbing out of an F-22 after a training mission. His flight suit was soaked with sweat, and she could see the telltale signs of high-G stress, the slightly unsteady walk and careful movements of someone whose body had been subjected to crushing forces. "How's the dusk job treating you, Chen?" Marcus called out as he passed her. "Getting all the excitement you can handle from those computer screens?" "Learning a lot," Sofia replied neutrally. "How was your flight?" Marcus's expression shifted slightly, losing some of his usual bravado. "Challenging. Mitchell's pushing us harder every day. Had to pull some serious Gs today, more than I've ever experienced." He paused, studying her face. "Makes me wonder how you handled 11 Gs in the centrifuge. That was, unusual." "Training and preparation," Sofia answered. The same response she had given before. But watching Marcus walk away, she noticed something that troubled her. His gait was more unsteady than it should have been for someone who'd only pulled standard training Gs. Either he was pushing himself harder than he was letting on, or the training program was demanding more from the pilots than the official records indicated. That afternoon, Sofia made a decision that would change everything. She began compiling a comprehensive analysis not just of historical high-G tolerance pilots, but of the current training program's demands on all pilot candidates. What she discovered would challenge everything the Air Force thought it knew about G-force training and pilot safety. But as she worked late into the evening, surrounded by data that painted an increasingly troubling picture, Sofia didn't know that her analysis would soon be needed to save lives.
The same exceptional abilities that had gotten her removed from flight training were about to become the key to preventing a disaster that no one else could see coming.
2 weeks into her assignment in flight systems analysis, Sofia had developed a routine that began before dawn and ended long after the flight line had gone quiet. While other pilots slept, she pored over decades of F-22 performance data, pilot medical records, and incident reports that painted an increasingly disturbing picture of the Air Force's most advanced fighter program. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning when she discovered a classified file buried deep in the historical archives. The document, marked for official use only, contained detailed analysis of F-22 accidents and incidents from the past 8 years. What Sofia found made her hands shake as she read. Master Chief Rodriguez, she called across the analysis center, her voice carrying an urgency that made him look up immediately from his morning reports. I need you to see this. Rodriguez approached her workstation carrying his ever-present coffee, but his casual demeanor shifted when he saw Sofia's expression. What did you find, Captain? Sofia pointed to her screen, where she'd compiled data that told a story no one wanted to acknowledge. 17 F-22 accidents or serious incidents in the past 8 years, 11 involving G-force-related pilot incapacitation, 6 fatalities. She pulled up another chart, but here's what's really troubling. 14 of these incidents occurred during maneuvers that should have been within the pilot's trained capabilities. Rodriguez set down his coffee and leaned closer to study the data. His weathered face grew increasingly grim as Sofia walked him through her analysis. These pilots were all cleared for the maneuvers they were attempting when the incidents occurred? Every single one, Sofia confirmed. But look at this. She highlighted specific data points on her chart. In each case, the pilots had been pushing their G tolerance to the maximum in training in the weeks leading up to the incident. The pattern suggests they were experiencing cumulative physiological stress that wasn't being detected by standard medical monitoring. The implications were staggering. The F-22 program had been graduating pilots who appeared ready for combat operations, but who were actually suffering from undetected physical deterioration that would manifest during critical moments. The training program's emphasis on maximum performance was literally burning out pilots' bodies in ways that didn't show up until it was too late. There's more, Sofia continued, pulling up biographical data on the pilots involved in incidents. 8 of the 11 G-lock incidents involved pilots who had demonstrated above-average G-tolerance during training. They were the high performers, the ones who could handle more than standard loads. Rodriguez studied the data with the methodical attention of someone who'd spent decades evaluating pilot performance. What's your theory, Captain? I think the training program has a fundamental flaw, Sofia explained. It identifies pilots who can handle extreme G-forces, then pushes them to their maximum capability repeatedly without understanding the long-term effects. The pilots who can't handle high Gs wash out early and stay safe. The ones who can handle it get pushed until their bodies give out during actual operations. The analysis center fell quiet except for the hum of computers processing real-time flight data from the morning's training missions. On the wall-mounted display, Sofia could see that Marcus Thompson was airborne again, conducting advanced combat maneuvering with 2 other candidates. His biometric data showed elevated stress levels and heart rate patterns that looked uncomfortably similar to the pre-incident data she'd been studying. Master Chief, Sofia said, pointing to Marcus's real-time data, compare his physiological readings to the historical patterns I've identified. Rodriguez studied the live telemetry, his expression growing more concerned. His stress indicators are elevated, but within acceptable ranges according to current protocols. According to current protocols, yes, but according to my analysis of incident patterns, he's showing early signs of the same physiological stress that preceded several of the accidents I've documented. Sofia pulled up another screen showing Marcus's training progression over the past month. He's been consistently pushing 9+ Gs in training with increasing frequency. His recovery times between high G sessions are decreasing, and his sleep quality has degraded according to his medical monitoring. The pattern was clear to Sofia, but she could see that Rodriguez was struggling with the implications. If her analysis was correct, the entire F-22 training program was built on a foundation that was slowly killing its best pilots. Captain Chen, Rodriguez said carefully, what you're suggesting would require fundamentally restructuring how we train F-22 pilots. The financial and operational implications would be enormous.
The alternative is continuing to lose pilots and aircraft to preventable incidents. Master Chief, I've identified specific modifications to training protocols that could reduce these risks by over 60%, but implementing them would require acknowledging that our current methods are flawed.
Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, studying the data that Sofia had compiled with the thoroughness of someone whose life had been dedicated to aviation safety. Finally, he spoke. Captain, I need you to prepare a comprehensive briefing on your findings. Include recommendations for immediate changes to current training protocols and long-term modifications to the program structure. You think leadership will listen? I think they'll have to, Rodriguez replied grimly, because if you're right about these patterns, we're about to have more incidents. And if we know about the risk and do nothing, those incidents become our responsibility. As Sofia began preparing her briefing, she pulled additional data on the current training class. What she found made her stomach clench with worry. Marcus Thompson wasn't the only pilot showing concerning signs. Jake Morrison's biometric data revealed similar stress patterns, and 2 other candidates showed physiological markers that matched Sofia's incident predictors. The training program that had rejected her for being too capable of handling G-forces was systematically damaging the pilots it did accept. The irony was bitter, but the implications were deadly serious. That afternoon, Sofia requested access to real-time monitoring of all F-22 training flights. Rodriguez approved the request, giving her the ability to track every pilot's physiological responses during actual flight operations. What she saw confirmed her worst fears. The pilots were being pushed to their physiological limits during every training session, with insufficient recovery time between high G exposures. Their bodies were accumulating stress and damage that wouldn't manifest until they faced genuine emergency situations. The program was creating a time bomb of pilot incapacitation that would explode during the moments when perfect performance was most critical. But Sofia also realized something else. Her own exceptional G tolerance wasn't just a personal advantage. It was a window into understanding human physiological limits that no one else possessed. She had experienced forces that would incapacitate other pilots, and she had done so while maintaining perfect cognitive function. Her unique perspective allowed her to recognize danger signs that others couldn't see because they'd never survived the experiences necessary to understand them. As evening fell over Falcon Ridge Air Base, Sofia Chen worked by the light of her computer screens, surrounded by data that told a story of institutional blindness and systemic failure. The same program that had declared her too dangerous to fly was quietly destroying the pilots it had accepted in her place. Tomorrow, she would present her findings to the base leadership, but tonight, watching the real-time telemetry from pilots who were unknowingly damaging their bodies in pursuit of excellence, Sofia Chen prepared to fight for changes that could save lives, including the lives of pilots who had never accepted her as one of their own. The woman they'd removed from flight training for exceeding human limitations was about to prove that sometimes exceeding limitations was exactly what the situation required. The conference room in Building A had seen countless briefings over the years, but Sofia suspected none quite like the one she was about to deliver. Colonel James Harrison sat at the head of the polished table, flanked by Captain Sarah Mitchell and Dr. Sarah Kim. Their expressions ranged from professional curiosity to barely concealed skepticism. To them, Sofia was still the pilot who'd been removed from F-22 training for physiological abnormalities, hardly a credible voice on pilot safety. Captain Chen, Colonel Harrison began, consulting his agenda, Master Chief Rodriguez indicated you've compiled some analysis of our training protocols. I'll be honest, I'm not sure why a pilot who couldn't complete the program is qualified to critique it. Sofia had expected this reception. She'd spent the morning preparing not just her data, but her response to the institutional resistance she knew she'd face. Sir, with respect, I wasn't removed from training due to inability. I was removed because my capabilities exceeded the program's parameters. Exceeded or endangered, Dr. Kim interjected. Your G tolerance results were so far outside normal ranges that we couldn't establish safe operational limits. And that's exactly why I'm uniquely qualified to identify the problems in your current system, Sofia replied, activating the wall-mounted display. Because I've experienced G-forces that would incapacitate other pilots, and I've done so while maintaining cognitive function. That gives me insight into physiological responses that no one else in this room possesses. The first slide showed 17 F-22 incidents over 8 years, each represented by a red marker on a timeline. The visual impact was immediate and undeniable. 17 accidents or serious incidents, 11 involving G-force-related pilot incapacitation, 6 fatalities, all involving pilots who had been cleared for the maneuvers they were attempting. Captain Mitchell leaned forward, studying the data. Captain Chen, these incidents were thoroughly investigated. Multiple factors contributed to each one: weather, equipment malfunction, tactical situations. I'm not disputing the contributing factors, Sofia replied, advancing to her next slide. I'm identifying a common underlying cause that wasn't recognized because no one was looking at the physiological data longitudinally. The screen now showed pilot medical data overlaid with training intensity charts. Every pilot involved in G-lock incidents had been subjected to maximum G-force training in the weeks preceding their accidents. Dr. Kim's expression shifted from skepticism to concern as she studied the medical data. What exactly are you suggesting? That our training protocols are causing cumulative physiological damage that doesn't manifest until pilots face genuine emergency situations, Sofia explained. We identify pilots who can handle extreme G-forces, then we push them to their maximum capability repeatedly without understanding the long-term effects on their cardiovascular and neurological systems. Colonel Harrison consulted his notes, his professional demeanor not quite hiding his irritation. Captain, these training protocols were developed by the Air Force's top physiologists and tested extensively. Are you suggesting that decades of research were wrong? Sofia replied, her voice remaining steady despite the hostile reception. I'm suggesting that the research was based on incomplete data because the researchers never had access to someone who could sustain 11 Gs while maintaining perfect cognitive function. They couldn't study the physiological mechanisms that I experience routinely. She advanced to her most damning slide, real-time biometric data from the current training class. This is yesterday's data from your current F-22 candidates. Marcus Thompson, Jake Morrison, and 3 others are showing physiological stress patterns identical to those that preceded the incidents I've documented. The room fell silent as the medical professionals studied the live telemetry data. Dr. Kim's expression grew increasingly troubled as she recognized patterns that her standard monitoring protocols had missed. These stress indicators were tracking them, but within acceptable ranges according to current standards. Current standards that don't account for cumulative damage, Sofia pressed. Dr. Kim, look at Thompson's cardiovascular stress patterns over the past month. His recovery times are increasing, his sleep quality is degrading, and his heart rate variability is showing signs of chronic stress adaptation. In civilian medicine, these would be warning signs of impending cardiac events. Captain Mitchell stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the polished floor. Captain Chen, I've been training F-22 pilots for 8 years. I know when my students are being pushed too hard, and I know when they're ready for operational deployment. With respect, Captain, you know when they appear ready based on their performance during controlled training scenarios. But these incidents occurred during operational flights when pilots faced unexpected stresses on top of their existing physiological damage.
The tension in the room was palpable. Sofia could see that her analysis was challenging fundamental assumptions about pilot training and safety, and the institutional response was predictably defensive. But she also saw something else. Dr. Kim was studying the medical data with growing alarm. "Colonel," Dr. Kim said quietly, "if Captain Chen's analysis is correct,
We need to immediately modify our training protocols. The liability implications alone are significant, Colonel Harrison finished. But so are the operational implications of changing a training program that has successfully prepared pilots for F-22 operations. He turned to Sofia with an expression that was carefully controlled. Captain Chen, what specific changes are you recommending? Sofia had prepared for this moment. Immediate implementation of enhanced physiological monitoring during all high-G training. Extended recovery periods between maximum G sessions. Modified training progressions that build G tolerance gradually rather than pushing pilots to their limits repeatedly. And most importantly, recognition that pilots with exceptional G tolerance require different training protocols than standard candidates. Different how? Captain Mitchell asked, her skepticism evident. They need to be trained to recognize and manage capabilities that exceed normal parameters. The 3 pilots in my historical analysis who completed F-22 training but later had incidents, they were never taught how to safely operate beyond standard human limitations. They were exceptional pilots trying to fly using protocols designed for average capabilities. Colonel Harrison was quiet for a long moment, studying the data that Sofia had compiled. Finally, he spoke. Captain Chen, these are serious allegations. If you're wrong, you're suggesting we unnecessarily restrict training that has proven effective. If you're right, he paused considering the implications. If you're right, we've been systematically damaging the pilots we're trying to prepare for combat. I'm right, sir, Sofia said simply. The data doesn't lie. The question is whether the Air Force is willing to acknowledge that its training methods need fundamental revision. Dr. Kim looked up from her tablet where she'd been reviewing Sofia's analysis. Colonel, I recommend we immediately implement enhanced monitoring protocols for all current F-22 candidates. Sofia's physiological data should be reviewed by our top researchers at the Air Force Medical Research Laboratory. And in the meantime, Colonel Harrison asked. In the meantime, Sofia replied, you have pilots in training who are showing the same warning signs that preceded 17 accidents and 6 fatalities. The question is whether you're going to wait until someone dies to acknowledge that the system needs to change. The silence that followed was deafening. Sofia had laid out her case with clinical precision, backed by data that was difficult to dispute. But she could see the institutional resistance in every face around the table. Changing fundamental training protocols would require admitting that the current system was flawed, with all the career and financial implications that admission would carry. Colonel Harrison closed his folder with the decisive snap of someone who'd reached a difficult decision. Captain Chen, you'll prepare a detailed written report with all supporting data. I'm convening a review board to evaluate your findings. He paused, his expression unreadable. But until that review is complete, training will continue under current protocols. As Sofia left the conference room, she realized that institutional inertia might prove more dangerous than any G-force she'd ever experienced. The same system that had rejected her for being too capable was now rejecting her analysis for being too inconvenient. And somewhere on the flight line, pilots were climbing into F-22s carrying physiological damage that could kill them when they needed their skills the most.
3 days after Sofia's contentious briefing, Colonel James Harrison found himself staring at classified documents that arrived via secure courier from Air Force Medical Research Laboratory at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The manila envelope marked Priority Review, Falcon Ridge Analysis contained preliminary findings that made his morning coffee taste like ash. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the Air Force's leading specialist in aerospace medicine, had reviewed Sofia's data with the clinical detachment of someone who'd spent 20 years studying pilot physiology. Her conclusions were unambiguous and terrifying. Captain Chen's analysis reveals systematic gaps in our understanding of high-G physiological stress that may have contributed to multiple fatalities. Colonel Harrison reached for his secure phone and dialed a number he'd hoped never to use. General Sterling's office, this is Colonel Harrison at Falcon Ridge. I need to speak with the general immediately. It's regarding pilot safety protocols. Within an hour, Sofia found herself recalled to the conference room, this time facing a much larger audience. General Robert Sterling had arrived from Peterson Air Force Base with a team of medical specialists, safety investigators, and legal advisors. The atmosphere was no longer skeptical, it was urgent and deeply concerned. Captain Chen, General Sterling began without preamble, Dr. Warren's preliminary review of your analysis suggests that we may have a systemic problem with F-22 training protocols. I need you to walk us through your findings in detail, and I need you to tell us exactly what immediate actions you're recommending. Sofia felt the weight of institutional attention in a way she'd never experienced. The same leadership that had dismissed her concerns 3 days earlier was now hanging on her every word. General, the core issue is that we've been treating G-force tolerance as a simple pass-fail metric, when in reality it's a complex physiological process that degrades over time under stress. She activated the wall display showing a comprehensive analysis she'd prepared over the past 72 hours. I've identified 3 distinct categories of pilots based on G tolerance. Standard performers handle up to 8 Gs safely. High performers can sustain 9 to 10 Gs with proper training. Exceptional performers like myself can exceed 11 Gs while maintaining cognitive function. Dr. Warren leaned forward, studying the data with intense interest. And your analysis suggests different training requirements for each category? Not just different training, Sofia replied. Different monitoring, different recovery protocols, and most importantly, different safety limits. We've been training all 3 categories using protocols designed for standard performers, then pushing high and exceptional performers beyond their safe operational limits. General Sterling consulted his notes, his expression grim. Captain, Dr. Warren's team has begun reviewing the medical records of all pilots involved in the incidents you identified. Their preliminary findings support your conclusions. He paused, clearly struggling with the implications. We may have been systematically damaging our best pilots through training methods that we believed were preparing them for combat. Sofia advanced to her next slide, showing real-time biometric data from the current training class. General, this is today's data from 5 F-22 candidates currently in training. All 5 are showing physiological stress patterns that match the pre-incident signatures I've identified. The room fell silent as medical professionals studied the live telemetry. Marcus Thompson's cardiovascular stress indicators were clearly elevated, showing the kind of chronic adaptation that preceded heart problems in civilian populations. Jake Morrison's neurological response patterns indicated developing issues with spatial orientation under stress. 3 other candidates showed varying degrees of physiological degradation. Dr. Kim, who had been quiet since the meeting began, finally spoke up. Captain Chen, if these patterns are accurate predictors, when would we expect to see incidents in the current training class? Sofia had been dreading this question, but she'd done the analysis. Based on historical patterns, we should expect the first serious incident within 2 to 3 weeks, possibly sooner if training intensity continues at current levels. General Sterling's expression hardened. Unacceptable. Colonel Harrison, I'm ordering immediate modifications to all F-22 training protocols effective immediately. He turned to Sofia. Captain Chen, you're being temporarily reassigned as special advisor to this investigation. I want detailed recommendations for revised training protocols within 48 hours. Captain Mitchell, who had remained defensive during the previous briefing, now looked genuinely shaken. General, if we modify training protocols midstream, it could delay the graduation of the current class by months. These pilots are scheduled for operational deployment. Better delayed deployment than dead pilots, General Sterling replied sharply. Captain Mitchell, you'll work with Captain Chen to develop modified training schedules that prioritize pilot safety over graduation timelines.
As the meeting continued, Sofia found herself in the surreal position of suddenly being the authority on training protocols she'd been banned from participating in just weeks earlier. But the transition wasn't smooth. Years of institutional momentum and ingrained assumptions don't change overnight, even with direct orders from a general. Dr. Warren pulled Sofia aside during a break in the meeting. Captain, I need to understand something. How did you develop the physiological capability to sustain 11 Gs? Your techniques could revolutionize how we train all high-performance pilots. Sofia had been expecting this question. Doctor, it was a combination of specialized cardiovascular training, breathing techniques adapted from freediving, and progressive conditioning that I developed over 18 months. But most importantly, I learned to recognize and manage physiological responses that most pilots never experience. Would you be willing to undergo comprehensive testing so we can document your techniques? Of course, but there's something more urgent, Sophia replied. I need access to the current training schedules and the authority to modify them immediately. Every day we continue current protocols, we're adding to the physiological damage these pilots are carrying. Dr. Warren nodded. General Sterling has already authorized that. But, Captain, there's something else. Your analysis suggests that pilots with exceptional G tolerance require fundamentally different training. Are you prepared to help develop those protocols? The irony wasn't lost on Sophia. The program that had rejected her for being too exceptional was now asking her to design training for pilots with exceptional capabilities. Yes, doctor, but we need to move quickly. That evening, Sophia found herself back in the Flight Systems Analysis Center, but with a very different mission. Instead of identifying problems in historical data, she was designing solutions for current operations. Master Chief Rodriguez worked beside her, his decades of experience helping translate her physiological insights into practical training modifications. Master Chief, Rodriguez said as they reviewed training schedules, you realize what you've done here. You've essentially forced the Air Force to admit that its premier fighter program was flawed at a fundamental level. Sophia nodded, studying biometric data from pilots who were unknowingly carrying physiological damage that could kill them. Master Chief, sometimes the system needs to be forced to confront uncomfortable truths. The question now is whether we can implement changes fast enough to prevent the incidents I've predicted. As midnight approached at Falcon Ridge Air Base, Sofia Chen worked to redesign the training program that had rejected her, driven by the knowledge that somewhere in the Nevada desert, pilots were sleeping fitfully with hearts and brains carrying stress damage that brought them closer to catastrophic failure with each passing day. The investigation had begun, but time was running out. The notification arrived at 0530 hours on a Thursday morning, delivered by secure courier to Colonel Harrison's office, while Sophia was 3 floors below, working through her second consecutive all-nighter redesigning F-22 training protocols. The letterhead bore the seal of the Pentagon, and the message was brief but momentous. Secretary of Defense Wilson will arrive Falcon Ridge 0800 hours Monday for comprehensive review of F-22 program effectiveness. Demonstration flight scheduled 1000 hours featuring top-performing candidates. Sophia learned about the visit 30 minutes later when Colonel Harrison summoned her to his office, where she found him pacing behind his desk like a caged animal. General Sterling was connected via secure video link from Peterson Air Force Base, his face displaying the kind of tension that came from having 5 days to prepare for career-defining scrutiny. Captain Chen, Colonel Harrison began without preamble, we have a problem. The Secretary of Defense is coming to evaluate our F-22 program, and he's expecting to see our best pilots demonstrate advanced combat maneuvers. Maneuvers that, according to your analysis, could be exactly the kind of high-stress situations that trigger the incidents you've predicted. Sophia felt her stomach drop. Sir, who's been selected for the demonstration? General Sterling answered from the video screen. Marcus Thompson, Jake Morrison, and Captain Lisa Rodriguez from the advanced class. They'll be conducting high-G combat maneuvering, air-to-air intercepts, and evasive maneuvers, exactly the kind of scenarios that showcase F-22 capabilities. And exactly the kind of scenarios that could cause G-lock incidents in pilots carrying the physiological damage I've documented, Sophia replied, pulling up the latest biometric data on her tablet. General, Thompson's cardiovascular stress indicators have actually worsened over the past week despite modified training protocols. Morrison's showing early signs of vestibular dysfunction, and Rodriguez, she paused, studying the data. Rodriguez is displaying neurological stress patterns I haven't seen before.
Colonel Harrison stopped pacing. Captain Chen, are you saying these pilots are unfit for demonstration flights? I'm saying they're carrying physiological damage that could manifest catastrophically during high-stress maneuvers. Sir, we've identified the problem, but we haven't had time to implement solutions. These pilots have been training under flawed protocols for months. You can't undo that damage in 5 days. The secure video connection crackled as General Sterling leaned closer to his camera. Captain Chen, the Secretary of Defense is coming here specifically because someone at the Pentagon has raised questions about F-22 training effectiveness. Your analysis, filtered through various channels, has reached the highest levels of military leadership. This demonstration isn't optional. It's make or break for the entire program. Sofia understood the impossible position everyone was in. Her analysis had triggered scrutiny that could result in fundamental changes to the F-22 program, or it could result in the program being terminated entirely if pilots failed during a high-profile demonstration. General, what if I recommended alternative pilots for the demonstration? Alternative pilots from where? Colonel Harrison asked. The current class represents our top performers. The advanced class pilots have even more exposure to the training methods you've identified as problematic. What about using the demonstration to showcase the modified training protocols instead of traditional combat maneuvers? Demonstrate precision flying that prioritizes safety over maximum performance. General Sterling shook his head. The Secretary expects to see F-22s performing at their maximum capability. Combat realistic scenarios, high-G maneuvering, the full spectrum of what these aircraft can do. He paused, clearly struggling with conflicting priorities. Captain Chen, is there any way to safely prepare these pilots for maximum performance demonstration flights? Sofia had been afraid this question would arise. The answer existed, but it required acknowledging capabilities that the Air Force had spent months trying to suppress. General, there is one approach that could work, but it would require using training techniques that aren't part of standard protocols. Explain. The physiological conditioning methods I developed to handle 11 plus Gs could be adapted for standard pilots. Specialized breathing techniques, cardiovascular preparation, and most importantly, real-time physiological monitoring during the demonstration flights. Sofia pulled up her personal training data. I could train the selected pilots in emergency techniques that would help them recognize and manage physiological distress before it becomes critical. Colonel Harrison looked skeptical. In 5 days, Captain? You're talking about teaching techniques that took you months to develop. Not teaching them to match my capabilities, teaching them to recognize their limits and operate safely within them. Think of it as physiological situational awareness rather than enhanced performance.
The room fell silent as both officers contemplated the implications. They were facing a demonstration that could validate or destroy the F-22 program, using pilots who carried hidden physiological damage that could manifest at the worst possible moment. General Sterling spoke first. Captain Chen, if you can develop a crash training program that reduces the risk of incidents during demonstration flights, you have my authorization to implement it immediately. But understand, if something goes wrong during that demonstration, it won't just end careers. It could end the F-22 program entirely. Over the following hours, Sofia found herself designing an intensive physiological preparation program unlike anything the Air Force had ever attempted. She would have 4 days to teach Marcus Thompson, Jake Morrison, and Lisa Rodriguez techniques that had taken her months to master. More critically, she would have to do it while working with pilots who had varying degrees of trust in her expertise. Marcus Thompson's reaction to his selection for emergency physiological training was predictably resistant. Chen, no offense, but I've been flying high-performance aircraft for 6 years. I think I know how to handle G-forces. Thompson, Sofia replied, your cardiovascular stress indicators show that your body is carrying damage equivalent to someone who's had multiple minor heart attacks. During high-stress maneuvers, that damage could cause you to black out at exactly the wrong moment. The bluntness of her assessment seemed to penetrate his usual bravado. You're saying I could die during the demonstration? I'm saying that without proper preparation, you could lose consciousness during critical phases of flight when the Secretary of Defense is watching.
the political and program implications of that kind of incident. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Marcus understood that a G-lock incident during a high-profile demonstration wouldn't just be embarrassing, it would be career-ending for everyone involved and potentially fatal for the pilot. Jake Morrison proved more receptive to Sofia's training program, perhaps because his medical background helped him understand the physiological principles she was explaining. Lisa Rodriguez, the advanced class pilot, was professional but clearly skeptical about taking instruction from someone who'd been removed from the program for physiological abnormalities. As Sofia began her crash course in extreme G-force physiology, she realized she was attempting something unprecedented, preparing pilots with hidden physiological damage to perform maximum capability demonstrations while teaching them techniques that could save their lives if everything went wrong. The irony wasn't lost on her. The pilot who'd been deemed too dangerous to fly F-22s was now responsible for ensuring that other pilots could fly them safely during the most important demonstration in the program's history. But as she worked with pilots whose bodies carried invisible damage, Sofia couldn't shake the feeling that even her extraordinary techniques might not be enough to prevent the kind of incident that could destroy everything the F-22 program had worked to achieve.
Monday morning arrived at Falcon Ridge Air Base with the kind of crystal-clear Nevada sky that made F-22 demonstrations look like choreographed poetry. Sofia stood in the observation tower at 0945 hours, watching 3 of America's most advanced fighters taxi toward the active runway while her stomach churned with anxiety that had nothing to do with the altitude. Secretary of Defense Jonathan Wilson had arrived 30 minutes earlier with an entourage that included congressional staffers, Pentagon officials, and a CNN crew documenting what was being billed as a showcase of next-generation air superiority. What they didn't know was that Sofia had spent the past 4 days teaching emergency physiological techniques to pilots whose bodies were carrying damage that could manifest catastrophically at any moment. "Falcon Lead, this is Tower," came the radio transmission. "You are cleared for takeoff. Winds 240 at 12 knots. Visibility unlimited." Marcus Thompson's voice crackled through the speakers with the confident tone that had carried him through 6 years of military aviation. "Tower, Falcon Lead rolling. Formation takeoff approved." Through her binoculars, Sofia watched 3 F-22 Raptors accelerate down the runway in perfect formation, their twin engines creating the distinctive thunder that never failed to impress civilian observers. But Sofia wasn't watching the aircraft. She was monitoring the real-time biometric data streaming to her tablet from the pilot's medical sensors. Marcus Thompson's heart rate was elevated, but within acceptable ranges. Jake Morrison showed slightly elevated stress indicators. Lisa Rodriguez's data looked normal. For the first 10 minutes of flight, Sofia began to hope that her crash training program had been effective. The demonstration began flawlessly. The 3 F-22 aircraft climbed to 25,000 feet and began a series of formation maneuvers that showcased the aircraft's incredible agility and precision. Secretary Wilson and his entourage watched from the observation deck as the fighters performed barrel rolls, vertical climbs, and high-speed passes that demonstrated American air superiority in unmistakable terms. "Impressive capabilities," Secretary Wilson commented to Colonel Harrison, who was providing running commentary on the aircraft's performance specifications. "These pilots make it look effortless." Sofia continued monitoring the biometric data, noting gradual increases in physiological stress as the pilots progressed through increasingly demanding maneuvers. The demonstration was scheduled to culminate with high-G combat scenarios that would push both aircraft and pilots to their operational limits. "Falcon Flight, this is Control. Proceed to combat demonstration area. Simulated air-to-air engagement, maximum performance authorized." This was the moment Sofia had been dreading. The combat demonstration required sustained high-G maneuvering that would stress the pilot's cardiovascular systems exactly the way her analysis had identified as most dangerous. She watched her tablet as all 3 pilots' biometric indicators began climbing to warning levels.
Marcus Thompson initiated the engagement with a climbing turn that pulled 8.5 Gs, well within F-22 capabilities, but at the upper end of what pilots with his physiological profile should attempt. Sofia could see his heart rate spike and his blood oxygen levels fluctuate in patterns that indicated cardiovascular stress. "Come on, Marcus," she whispered, watching data that only she could interpret in real time. "Remember the breathing techniques." The simulated dogfight intensified as Jake Morrison maneuvered to engage Lisa Rodriguez in a high-speed pursuit that required both pilots to pull sustained 9G turns. Sofia's data showed Morrison's neurological stress indicators climbing into the yellow zone, not immediately dangerous, but approaching the levels that preceded G-lock incidents. Then the unexpected happened. A sudden wind shear at 20,000 feet, not uncommon in Nevada's mountain terrain, but not part of the planned demonstration scenario, cat Lisa Rodriguez's aircraft during a high G turn. Her aircraft dropped suddenly, and her automatic response was to pull harder on the controls to regain altitude and rejoin the formation. Sofia watched in horror as Rodriguez's G-meter spiked to 10.2 Gs, well beyond what her damaged physiology could handle safely. Her biometric data immediately shifted into red warning zones, heart rate maxing out, blood oxygen dropping, neurological indicators showing the early stages of G-induced loss of consciousness. "Falcon 3, this is control," came the urgent radio call. "Check your altitude and heading. You appear to be deviating from planned flight path." Rodriguez's response was slurred and delayed. "Control, Falcon 3, experiencing some difficulty." The words every pilot dreaded. Sofia could see from her data that Rodriguez was experiencing G-lock. She was conscious but cognitively impaired, flying a $550 million fighter jet while her brain was starved of oxygen. In the observation deck, Secretary Wilson and his staff were unaware that they were witnessing the exact kind of incident that could destroy the F-22 program.
"Emergency protocols," Sofia said into her headset, connecting to the control tower. "Rodriguez is experiencing G-lock. She needs immediate assistance." But the situation was about to get worse. Marcus Thompson, seeing Rodriguez in distress, instinctively maneuvered to provide assistance, exactly the kind of aggressive flying that would push his already stressed cardiovascular system beyond safe limits. Sofia watched his biometric data spike as he pulled 9.8 Gs in a climbing turn designed to intercept Rodriguez's aircraft. "Thompson, negative." Sofia transmitted on the emergency frequency. "Do not exceed 8 Gs. Your physiological limits." She was cut off as Thompson's heart rate monitor flatlined for 3 seconds, a brief cardiac episode brought on by extreme G-force stress in a cardiovascular system that had been damaged by months of excessive training. When his heart rhythm resumed, it was irregular and weak. Now Sofia had 2 pilots in physiological distress flying F-22s at 300 miles per hour in front of the Secretary of Defense and a CNN news crew. Jake Morrison was the only pilot still functioning normally, but he was now alone in trying to manage an emergency situation that was spiraling beyond anyone's control. "Control, this is Falcon 2. Morrison's voice came through the radio with the calm professionalism that defined the best military pilots. "I have 2 aircraft in distress, requesting emergency vectors to base and medical standby." In the observation tower, Sofia made a decision that would define the rest of her career. She grabbed her flight helmet and ran toward the door. Her destination, the backup F-22 that was kept on standby for exactly this kind of emergency. "Captain Chen, where are you going?" Colonel Harrison called after her. "To do what I was trained for," Sofia replied, not breaking stride. "Those pilots need help that only someone with my G-tolerance can provide." As she ran across the tarmac toward an aircraft she'd been banned from flying, Sofia Chen prepared to prove that sometimes being too capable was exactly what the situation required. The woman they'd said could never handle F-22 operations was about to attempt a rescue that would require handling G-forces that no other pilot could survive. Behind her, Secretary Wilson watched 3 F-22s struggling to return to base, unaware that he was about to witness either the validation or the complete destruction of America's most advanced fighter program.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Sofia's hands moved with practiced precision through the F-22 startup sequence, muscle memory taking over as her conscious mind processed the impossible situation unfolding at 20,000 feet above the Nevada desert. Through her canopy, she could see 3 aircraft in various stages of distress. Rodriguez's F-22 weaving erratically as she fought G-lock impairment, Thompson's aircraft flying with the mechanical precision of someone whose heart rhythm was struggling to maintain consciousness, and Morrison's jet trying to shepherd both damaged birds towards safety. Falcon 4 requesting immediate takeoff clearance, Sofia transmitted, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Emergency intercept of distressed aircraft. The tower's response was immediate. Falcon 4, you are not authorized for F-22 operations. Return to Tower. This is Captain Chen, Sofia interrupted, advancing throttles and beginning her takeoff roll without waiting for clearance. I have authorization from General Sterling for emergency operations. 3 pilots are in physiological distress, and I'm the only one qualified to assist. The lie was necessary. General Sterling hadn't authorized anything, but Sofia knew that by the time anyone could verify her claim, she'd either have saved 3 lives or joined them in catastrophe. The F-22 Raptor accelerated down the runway with a violent thrust that never failed to take her breath away, even under emergency conditions. Falcon 4 airborne, she reported, climbing at an angle that would have been impossible in any other aircraft, requesting vectors to distressed aircraft and immediate medical standby. In the observation tower, chaos had erupted as officials realized that the demonstration had become a genuine emergency. Secretary Wilson stood at the windows with binoculars, watching 4 F-22s now maneuvering in increasingly desperate patterns, as 2 pilots struggled with physiological failures that were invisible to ground observers. Colonel Harrison, Secretary Wilson said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that ended careers, I want to know exactly what's happening up there, and I want to know why a 4th aircraft is now involved in what was supposed to be a controlled demonstration. Colonel Harrison was coordinating with the control tower, trying to manage an emergency that was unfolding in real time in front of the most important audience the F-22 program had ever faced. Sir, we have 2 pilots experiencing physiological distress during high-G maneuvering. Captain Chen has launched in a support aircraft to provide assistance. Captain Chen? Isn't that the pilot you removed from the program for physiological abnormalities? Secretary Wilson's expression was unreadable, but his tone suggested he was beginning to understand connections that hadn't been explained to him during the morning's briefing. Meanwhile, at 25,000 feet, Sofia was rapidly closing on the formation of distressed aircraft. Her biometric data showed elevated stress levels, but nothing approaching the critical indicators she was monitoring from the other pilots. Through her helmet's heads-up display, she could see Rodriguez's F-22 continuing to deviate from stable flight paths as G-lock effects impaired a cognitive function. Falcon 3, this is Falcon 4, Sofia transmitted on the emergency frequency. I'm here to provide assistance. Can you respond to radio calls? Rodriguez's reply was slurred and confused. Falcon 4? Who? I'm having trouble. Controls feel heavy. Classic G-lock symptoms. Rodriguez was conscious but cognitively impaired, her brain struggling to process information while her body fought the after-effects of extreme G-force exposure. In civilian aircraft, this would be manageable. In an F-22 flying at 400 miles per hour, it was potentially fatal. Sofia's biometric monitoring showed that Rodriguez's physiological distress was worsening. Her heart rate remained dangerously elevated, and her neurological indicators suggested she was entering the 2nd phase of G-lock, the stage where pilots could lose consciousness entirely without warning. Falcon 2, this is 4, Sofia called to Morrison, who was flying the most stable aircraft in the formation. What's Thompson's status? 4, Thompson's responsive but weak. Says he's having chest pain and difficulty breathing. I think he had some kind of cardiac event during the high-G maneuvering. Sofia processed this information with growing urgency. Thompson was experiencing the kind of cardiovascular crisis she'd predicted in her analysis. Heart rhythm disruption caused by extreme G-forces applied to a cardiovascular system already damaged by months of excessive training stress. The situation required a solution that no F-22 pilot had ever attempted. Sofia needed to physically guide Rodriguez's aircraft to a safe landing, while managing Thompson's medical emergency and maintaining formation flight with Morrison. The maneuver would require her to fly in close proximity to unstable aircraft while maintaining perfect situational awareness and decision-making capability under extreme stress.
But as Sofia maneuvered closer to Rodriguez's aircraft, a new crisis emerged. Rodriguez, in her G-lock-impaired state, began an aggressive climbing turn that would take her aircraft beyond its safe operational envelope. The maneuver was pulling her toward 11 Gs, forces that would either cause complete loss of consciousness or structural damage to her aircraft. Falcon 3, negative climb, Sofia transmitted urgently. You're exceeding safe G limits. Rodriguez either couldn't hear the transmission or couldn't process it. Her F-22 continued climbing and turning at an angle that was approaching the aircraft's structural limitations. Sofia realized that Rodriguez was about to either black out completely or overstress her aircraft to the point of structural failure. There was only one solution, and it required capabilities that no other F-22 pilot possessed. Sofia advanced her throttles and initiated a climbing turn that pulled her instantly to 10 Gs. The crushing force pressed her deep into her ejection seat, but her specialized training and exceptional physiology allowed her to maintain perfect cognitive function while experiencing forces that would incapacitate any other pilot. But 10 Gs wasn't enough. To intercept Rodriguez's aircraft and guide it to safety, Sofia needed to match a flight path that was pulling nearly 12 Gs, forces beyond what any F-22 pilot had ever sustained in operational conditions. Falcon 4, what are you doing? Morrison's voice carried obvious concern as he watched Sofia's aircraft maneuver in ways that seemed to violate the laws of physics. Sofia didn't respond. At 12 Gs, she weighed over 1,400 pounds, and speaking required enormous effort. But her vision remained clear, her decision-making sharp, and her control of the aircraft absolute. She was experiencing G-forces that would kill most people, while maintaining the kind of precision flying that was necessary to save lives. Through sheer force of will and physiological capability that existed at the outer limits of human performance, Sofia positioned her F-22 directly alongside Rodriguez's aircraft. Using hand signals visible through the canopy and gentle nudges of her aircraft's position, she began guiding Rodriguez away from the dangerous high-G climb and towards stable, level flight. The maneuver required sustaining 12+ Gs for nearly 90 seconds, longer than any pilot had ever maintained such forces while flying operational aircraft. But Sofia's extraordinary training and exceptional physiology allowed her to remain functional while her body experienced stresses that would have been fatal to anyone else. As Rodriguez's aircraft finally leveled out at a safe altitude and airspeed, Sofia gradually reduced her own G-loading, feeling the crushing weight lift from her chest as her aircraft returned to normal flight parameters. Her biometric data would later show that she had sustained forces that approached the theoretical limits of human G tolerance while maintaining perfect aircraft control and situational awareness. Falcon 3, do you copy? Sofia called, her voice hoarse from the extreme physiological stress. Rodriguez's response was clearer now that she was no longer pulling excessive G-forces. Falcon 4, I copy. I don't know what happened, but thank you. I couldn't control the aircraft. In the observation tower, Secretary Wilson had watched the entire sequence through high-powered optics, seeing 4 F-22s maneuvering in patterns that defied his understanding of aircraft capabilities. Colonel Harrison, I want a complete debrief on what just occurred. That was either the most impressive flying I've ever witnessed or the most dangerous. As Sofia guided the formation of aircraft toward Falcon Ridge Air Base, she realized that her extraordinary capabilities had finally found their purpose.
The same physiological abnormalities that had gotten her banned from F-22 operations had just enabled her to save 3 lives and possibly the entire program. But the most challenging part of the mission was still ahead, getting 3 physiologically compromised pilots safely on the ground while the most important audience in military aviation watched every move.
The 4 F-22 Raptors touched down at Falcon Ridge Air Base in a formation that looked deceptively routine to casual observers, but Sofia knew that each successful landing represented a triumph over physiological limits that had nearly claimed 3 lives. As her aircraft rolled to a stop on the tarmac, she could see emergency vehicles already positioned near the flight line, their crews prepared for medical emergencies that thankfully were no longer critical. Marcus Thompson's voice crackled through the radio as he shut down his engines. "Falcon 4, I don't know what you did up there, but thank you. I thought I was going to black out completely." Lisa Rodriguez was more direct. "Captain Chen, that was the most incredible flying I've ever witnessed. You saved my life." As Sofia climbed out of her cockpit, she was immediately surrounded by medical personnel who began checking her vital signs with the kind of urgent attention typically reserved for crash survivors. Dr. Kim approached with a tablet displaying Sofia's biometric data from the flight, her expression a mixture of medical fascination and genuine concern. "Dr. Kim," said Dr. Kim, studying readings that should have been impossible, "you sustained 12.3 Gs for an extended period while maintaining perfect cognitive function. According to everything we know about human physiology, that should have killed you." "But it didn't," Sofia replied simply, allowing the medical team to complete their examination. "And it allowed me to save 3 pilots who were experiencing exactly the kind of physiological failures I warned about in my analysis." Secretary of Defense Wilson approached the group with an expression that Sofia couldn't read. His morning had begun with expectations of witnessing a routine demonstration of F-22 capabilities. Instead, he'd observed an emergency that had revealed fundamental problems with the Air Force's most advanced fighter program, and a pilot whose capabilities seemed to defy human limitations. "Captain Chen," Secretary Wilson said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to receiving immediate answers, "I need to understand what happened during that flight. From my observation, you performed maneuvers that appeared to exceed both aircraft and pilot limitations." Colonel Harrison joined the group, carrying a thick folder of preliminary incident reports and medical data. "Sir, Captain Chen launched without authorization to assist pilots who were experiencing G-force-induced physiological distress. Her intervention prevented what could have been multiple aircraft losses and pilot fatalities." "Without authorization?" Secretary Wilson's eyebrows rose. "Captain, you took an F-22 into a combat situation without proper clearance?" "Sir, with respect, 3 pilots were in immediate danger of G-lock incidents that could have resulted in aircraft loss and fatalities. I had the physiological capability to assist when no one else did." General Sterling's voice interrupted the discussion as he approached the group, having flown in from Peterson Air Force Base during the emergency. "Mr. Secretary, Captain Chen's unauthorized flight violated regulations, but it also prevented a catastrophic incident during your visit. The questions we need to answer are why 3 of our best pilots experienced simultaneous physiological failures and how Captain Chen was able to perform rescue maneuvers that should have been impossible." Over the next 4 hours, Sofia found herself at the center of the most comprehensive investigation of F-22 operations in the program's history. Secretary Wilson had ordered immediate medical examinations of all pilots involved, detailed analysis of flight data recorders, and a complete review of training protocols that had led to the morning's crisis. The medical findings were damning and vindicative of Sofia's analysis. Marcus Thompson showed evidence of cardiac stress equivalent to someone who'd suffered multiple minor heart attacks. Lisa Rodriguez displayed neurological indicators consistent with chronic G-force exposure beyond safe limits. Jake Morrison, despite appearing unaffected during the flight, showed early signs of the same physiological damage that had nearly incapacitated his colleagues. "Captain Chen," Dr. Elizabeth Warren said during the medical debrief, having flown in from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, "Your predictions about pilot physiological degradation were not just accurate, they were conservative.
These pilots were closer to catastrophic failure than even your analysis suggested. But the most significant discovery came from analyzing Sofia's own flight data. The G-force measurements from her rescue maneuver showed sustained forces that exceeded anything previously recorded in operational F-22 flights. More importantly, her biometric data revealed physiological responses that challenged fundamental assumptions about human G-tolerance. Captain, Dr. Warren continued, studying Sofia's medical data with the fascination of someone witnessing a paradigm shift. Your cardiovascular and neurological responses during 12+ G exposure suggest physiological adaptations we've never documented. Your training methods haven't just enhanced your G tolerance, they've fundamentally altered how your body responds to extreme forces.
Secretary Wilson had remained largely silent during the medical briefings, but his questions during the operational review were pointed and comprehensive. Colonel Harrison, how long has the Air Force known about the physiological issues Captain Chen identified? Sir, Captain Chen submitted her analysis 3 weeks ago. We began investigating immediately, but hadn't completed protocol modifications before today's demonstration. And how long has Captain Chen been removed from F-22 training? Colonel Harrison consulted his files. Approximately 2 months, sir. She was reassigned due to G-tolerance capabilities that exceeded program parameters. Secretary Wilson was quiet for a long moment, processing information that revealed institutional failures at multiple levels. Let me understand this correctly. You removed the one pilot who could safely handle extreme G-forces from F-22 training, continued training pilots using methods she identified as dangerous, then required her unauthorized intervention to prevent fatalities during my visit? The silence that followed was profound. Sofia could see career-ending implications in the faces around the conference table, but she also saw something else. The beginning of institutional recognition that fundamental changes were necessary. Captain Chen, Secretary Wilson said, turning his attention to her directly, your analysis predicted these physiological failures, your intervention prevented a catastrophic incident, and your capabilities demonstrate possibilities we apparently didn't understand. What recommendations do you have for preventing similar incidents in the future? Sofia had been preparing for this question since her first day in flight systems analysis. Sir, the F-22 program needs entirely new training protocols that account for individual physiological variations rather than assuming standard human limitations. We need enhanced monitoring systems that can detect cumulative G-force damage before it becomes critical. And we need to acknowledge that pilots with exceptional capabilities require different training than those with standard limitations. Different training or different aircraft assignments? Different training, sir. Exceptional G-tolerance should be viewed as a strategic advantage rather than a disqualification, but it requires understanding physiological principles that aren't part of current medical protocols. General Sterling leaned forward. Captain Chen, are you suggesting that pilots like yourself should be trained for missions that exceed standard F-22 operational parameters? Sofia considered the question carefully. General, I'm suggesting that human physiological limits are more variable than current training assumes. Some pilots can safely operate beyond standard parameters, but only with proper training and monitoring. Today's incident occurred because pilots were pushed beyond their individual limits without anyone recognizing the danger signs. Secretary Wilson made notes on his tablet, clearly formulating decisions that would reshape F-22 operations. Captain Chen, effective immediately, you're being reassigned to lead a comprehensive review of F-22 training protocols. I want new standards that account for physiological variations, enhanced monitoring systems, and training methods that maximize pilot capabilities while ensuring safety. As the investigation concluded, Sofia realized that her extraordinary flight had accomplished something she'd never expected. It had forced the Air Force to confront fundamental assumptions about pilot training and human limitations. The same capabilities that had gotten her removed from the program were now being recognized as exactly what the program needed.
But more importantly, 3 pilots were alive who might not have survived without intervention from someone who could sustain G-forces that would kill most people. Sometimes, Sofia reflected, being different wasn't a liability. It was exactly what the situation required.
6 months after the demonstration that changed everything, Captain Sofia Chen stood in the same briefing room where she'd once been told her physiological capabilities exceeded safe parameters for F-22 operations. But everything had changed. The walls now displayed charts and graphs from the Chen Protocol, revolutionary training methods that had reduced G-force-related incidents by 78% while actually improving pilot performance across all metrics. The key principle, Sofia explained to a room full of F-22 instructors from bases across the country, is that human physiological limits aren't fixed numbers, they're variable ranges that can be safely expanded through proper training, monitoring, and individual assessment. The audience included Captain Sarah Mitchell, who had transitioned from skeptical instructor to one of Sofia's most effective advocates. Sitting in the front row was Marcus Thompson, now fully recovered from his cardiac episode and serving as a test pilot for the new training protocols. His notebook, once empty of anything but bravado, now contained detailed physiological data and training observations that rivaled Sofia's own meticulous records. "Captain Chen," asked an instructor from Langley Air Force Base, "how do we identify pilots who can safely exceed standard G limits without subjecting everyone to potentially dangerous testing?" Sofia activated the wall display showing biometric screening protocols that had been developed based on her unique physiological characteristics. "We've identified 12 key indicators that predict high G tolerance potential: cardiovascular efficiency, neurological response patterns, skeletal structure ratios, and most importantly, psychological factors that allow pilots to maintain cognitive function under extreme stress." The transformation hadn't been easy. Implementing the Chen Protocol required admitting that decades of training methods had been fundamentally flawed, with financial and political implications that reached the highest levels of military leadership. But the results spoke for themselves. F-22 pilots trained under the new protocols showed superior performance in both controlled testing and operational deployments. Dr. Elizabeth Warren approached the podium as Sofia concluded her presentation. "Captain Chen, could you share the latest data on pilot performance improvements?" Sofia pulled up comprehensive statistics that still amazed her 6 months after implementation. Pilots trained under modified protocols show 34% better performance in high G maneuvering, 45% reduction in physiological stress indicators, and most importantly, 0 G-lock incidents in over 2,000 flight hours. But the numbers, impressive as they were, didn't tell the complete story. The real transformation had been cultural, changing an institution that viewed exceptional capabilities as problems to be managed rather than assets to be developed. Jake Morrison, now graduated and assigned to an operational F-22 squadron, raised his hand from the back of the room. "Captain Chen, what's the status on the Enhanced G-Tolerance pilot program?" This was Sofia's proudest achievement. The Air Force had established a specialized track for pilots who demonstrated exceptional G-tolerance with training protocols designed to safely develop capabilities that exceeded standard human limitations. Instead of being disqualified for extraordinary abilities, these pilots were now being prepared for missions that required exactly those capabilities. We currently have 15 pilots in the enhanced program. They're being trained for high-threat scenarios that require maneuvering beyond standard F-22 parameters. Early results suggest they'll be capable of air combat performance that exceeds anything our adversaries can match. Lisa Rodriguez, now serving as an instructor pilot herself, stood to address the room. 6 months ago, I nearly died because my body was carrying damage from training methods that pushed me beyond safe limits without anyone recognizing the warning signs. Today, pilots with my physiological profile are being monitored, trained, and deployed in ways that maximize their capabilities while ensuring their safety. The afternoon session focused on implementation challenges that other bases had encountered while adopting the Chen Protocol. Sofia had spent months traveling between F-22 bases, working with local medical staff and instructors to customize training methods for different operational requirements. Master Chief Rodriguez, now serving as senior advisor for the program, approached Sofia during a break in the proceedings. "Captain,
I've got the latest data from operational squadrons using Chen protocol-trained pilots. Combat readiness scores are up 23% across the board, and pilot confidence levels are the highest we've ever recorded. But Sofia's attention was drawn to a familiar figure entering the briefing room. General Robert Sterling, now wearing the additional star of a newly promoted two-star general, had arrived for the afternoon session with an announcement that would define the next phase of Sofia's career.
Ladies and gentlemen, General Sterling addressed the room. I'm here to announce that the Chen Protocol has been selected for implementation across all Air Force fighter programs, not just F-22 operations. Captain Chen has been promoted to Major and will be establishing the Advanced Physiological Training Center at Edwards Air Force Base. The applause was immediate and sustained. Sofia felt the same mixture of pride and responsibility that had driven her through every challenge of her military career. The pilot who had been removed from F-22 training for exceeding human limitations was now being tasked with teaching the entire Air Force how to safely exceed those limitations. After the ceremony, Sofia found herself alone in the briefing room, studying charts that showed the dramatic improvements in pilot safety and performance since implementing her protocols. Through the windows, she could see F-22s conducting training flights, aircraft piloted by aviators who were now trained to recognize and manage their physiological responses rather than simply enduring them. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Major Chen, this is Captain Jennifer Walsh, recent graduate of your Enhanced G-Tolerance program. Wanted you to know I successfully completed a 13G intercept mission in Iraq last week. The tactical advantages of Enhanced G-Tolerance proved decisive in a combat situation. Thank you for proving that being different can be exactly what the mission requires. Sofia smiled and put the phone away. She'd been called too small, too different, too capable for standard operations. They'd all been wrong about what those characteristics meant. Sometimes the person everyone considers an outlier is exactly the person everyone needs. Sometimes the pilot who can't fit standard parameters is the one who needs to rewrite the parameters entirely. As evening fell over Falcon Ridge Air Base, Sofia Chen walked past the flight line one final time before her transfer to Edwards. The same F-22s that had once been forbidden to her were now piloted by aviators trained in methods she had developed, carrying capabilities she had proven possible. The woman they tried to ground had ended up teaching the entire Air Force how to fly higher, faster, and more safely than anyone had thought possible. She'd proven that exceptional abilities weren't limitations to be managed, they were advantages to be developed and deployed when the mission demanded nothing less than the impossible. From the control tower, she could see pilots preparing for night training flights, their pre-flight checks now including physiological monitoring systems that would have prevented the incidents she'd witnessed 6 months earlier. Each flight represented validation of a simple principle, that the courage to be different in a conformist world might just be the most important capability of all. Major Sofia Chen walked to her quarters, carrying the knowledge that her legacy would live on in every G-force safely sustained, every physiological limit safely exceeded, and every pilot who learned that their unique capabilities, however different, might be exactly what their country needed them to be. The range would remember her long after she was gone, but more importantly, every F-22 pilot trained in her methods would carry forward the understanding that being exceptional wasn't a problem to be solved, it was a gift to be shared.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.